as someone who worked at Google in Europe for a very long time, what's your reaction to this?
Well, this has been going on for quite a while. This is not a new revelation, and the statements we've heard so far, I don't think we've seen publicly the statement of objections, are relatively bland, so we'll see what comes out. I think a lot of it will come down to, well, number one, is Google dominant, and then number two, does it abuse that dominance? If you just look at universal search, Google versus Yahoo versus Bing, Google has 92% market share in Europe. If you look at how people shop for hotels, consumer electronics, credit cards, banks, etc., these days they increasingly use vertical specialist sites, mobile apps, and Google is not a part of that process. For example, Yelp says 40% of their restaurant bookings come straight through their app with no use of Google whatsoever. So I think number one is, are they dominant? Number two will be, are they abusing it? And I can certainly say from my time at Google, but my observation since is Google will always be experimenting to say, how do we give consumers what they want? And to my knowledge and knowing the people at Google and the way they work, I don't think they would have ever said, let's place our products first. They would have said, consumers seem to like vertical specialist search. Let's change our search format and see if they like it. And the final thing I'd say, before handing back to you, is that every time Google makes product searches, algorithm changes, ad format changes, there are winners and losers. It's no surprise that people have been hit and complained. The question will be whether it's upheld based on, are they dominant and have they abused it?
Paul, how serious is this allegation against Google? How serious is it that the EU has now ratcheted this up to formal charges?
Well, I think it's important to emphasise that the statement of objections is only an interim stage. This marks the end of the first phase of the investigation, where the Commission looks at the matter from a preliminary point of view. The statement of objections is basically, it's a short surmise of where it's got to with its investigations, and now Google will have the opportunity to put its side of the case in more detail. It's important to emphasise at this stage as well that there is no finding on liability. This is just what the Commission, this is the direction of travel in the Commission's thinking. We don't yet have a conclusion from the Commission in terms of whether or not there should be a fine, and if there is a fine, that could be up to 10% of Google's group worldwide turnover. So this is very much an interim stage, but I think it is fair to say that it is serious, and Google have been trying to settle this through some form of commitments. Unfortunately, that hasn't worked. It will still have the opportunity to offer concessions, but unlike the FTC investigation, it's not been able to close it via that channel.
In the worst case, Cory, how much could this hurt Google?
Well, there's obviously $5 billion at stake, right? But maybe beyond more so. That. Well, beyond that, I think the real issue is what does Google promise to do compared to what is Google actually doing? I went back and looked at the Google IPO today, which was 10 years ago or so, and the company said our search results are unbiased. People believe that Google's going to give them the best search results. Google, in defense of the EU case, said if you were to go on Google and search for flights from Charles de Gaulle Airport to JFK or to SFO, you'll get these results across the internet. They'll be the same. So I went and did that this morning. I did a kayak search and a Google flight search, and guess what? I found cheaper flights on kayak, flights that Google was not getting a piece of. And so that says to me that the real risk for Google is that the information that their search results are sometimes biased in favor of Google-favored results, not the best deals for consumers. That could hurt this company even more than $5 billion.
Ben, what's your reaction to that?
So my reaction to that is not so much that Google's being biased, that Google actually isn't doing a good enough job in travel search, and if they don't do a better job, they're going to become irrelevant to consumers because consumers will realize they don't get the best deals on Google. So it's a sort of a proven fact with lots of data, both on desktop and especially on mobile, that less and less consumers, especially sophisticated consumers with a lot of money, are starting their search journey with Google because of examples like the one Cory just gave, is they're finding a better experience and better deals, etc., elsewhere. So Google, I think, has an obligation to its customers and, quite frankly, its shareholders to try and improve its results. And that means improving the format, which probably means having more choice, more images, more ability to select and filter and sort the way Kayak does, the way Amazon does, etc. Otherwise, they'll become irrelevant and, quite frankly, sort of start declining at some stage. So I think Cory's point to me says Kayak's still winning, so why would Kayak worry about Google if they're still finding better offers? And I realize there's a lot more subtleties than that, but Google needs to basically keep improving its offering, which probably means it wants to do more of the same rather than lose this battle. And just coming back to the sort of $5 billion fine, I think a $5 billion fine is far less worrying to Google than saying you can't do vertical search or something like that, or you have to separate it and run it separately, because that would mean that the Google experience would get worse and worse compared to the vertical search specialists over time, which would make Google less and less relevant. So I think the fine to me is far less worrying than Google having to stop innovating or something like that.
Quickly, Paul, paint the most dramatic scenario for Google. In the most dramatic scenario, could Google have to break up in Europe?
I don't think it could come to that under a sort of what we would call a behavioural investigation. It could be that Google would, in search of a concession, and I think this is an unlikely scenario, that it could offer some form of formal breakup to placate the Commission's concerns. But I think that, as your guest has said, I think that the most worrying aspect of this is that Google will be forced to comply with a legal precedent which really drives a coach and horses through the way it does business. I mean, there are other aspects of what's come out of the Commission today which I think are very interesting. I mean, looking at the Android case, it's talking about the way in which Google licenses with manufacturers such as Motorola and Samsung, and it's saying that it's obliging those manufacturers to exclusively pre-install certain Google apps. And this is interesting from an EU antitrust lawyer's perspective, because it's very reminiscent of what happened with Microsoft, Windows Media Player, and Microsoft Windows back in the 90s, right, when Windows was as important a gateway to several markets as mobile devices and operating systems on mobile devices are today. And quite frankly, you know, the market share of Android is really quite impressive, particularly against Apple, which is a strong market player. Google has done very well to get itself into a good market position.